There are realms in fantasy known for their rise and others known for their fall. But what about a kingdom defined by both its resilience and its slow, inevitable decline? A realm that began as a refugee settlement grew to project power across a continent and ended as a quiet haven for farewells, presided over by the ancient shipwrights Círdan. Hi guys, my name is Jason Hamilton and I'm a creator of my own fantasy universe, and I've drawn upon epic stories like this one. And this is the story of Lindon, from the reign of its last high king to the departure of the last ship into the west. At the end of the First Age, the world was broken. The War of Wrath, a cataclysmic battle against the original Dark Lord Morgoth, ended with his defeat. But the victory came at a price. The entire continent of Beleriand, the stage for ages of conflict, sank beneath the waves, and all that remained of the western mainland was a coastal strip of land nestled against the Erin Luin, the Blue Mountains. This surviving land was originally called Alciriant, home to the Green Elves. The battered survivors of the war, elves, men, and dwarves, all found refuge here. While many elves answered the call to return to the deathless lands of Valinor, many more did not wish to abandon a world they had fought so hard to protect. These elves chose to stay, and in the first year of the Second Age, they established a new kingdom, and they called it Lindon, honoring its ancient name. The elves needed a leader, and they turned to the last heir of the High Kings of the Noldor, Gil-galad. There's some debate on his exact parentage. Some texts say he was the son of Fingon, others of Orodreth, but no one questioned his right to rule. Under Gil-galad, Lindon wasn't just a refugee camp, it became the new center of Elven civilization, a sort of beacon of hope watching over the western seas. The kingdom was split by the newly formed Gulf of Lune into North Lindon, or Forlindon, and South Lindon, or Harlindon. At the heart of it all lay the Grey Havens, Mithlund, a legendary port city that would become the last link between Middle-earth and the Undying Lands. This new kingdom was a sanctuary, a place to preserve the wisdom and culture of a bygone age, but the peace they had earned was destined to be short-lived. For the first few centuries, Lindon prospered. Then, in the year 600 of the Second Age, a ship arrived at the Grey Havens. It was Entelesse, the first vessel to arrive from the newly established island kingdom of Numenor. These were the descendants of Edain, the men who had fought alongside the elves in the First Age. Gil-galad welcomed them, renewing the ancient friendship, and it's even thought that this was the very spot where centuries earlier the brothers Elrond and Elros parted ways, one choosing the life of an elf, the other the fate of a mortal man. This friendship with Numenor became a cornerstone of the age. Their sailors and scholars visited Lindon often, exchanging knowledge and strengthening their alliance. It was a good thing too, because a new shadow was stirring in the east. Gil-galad, with the keen sight of the elves, was one of the first to sense it. He sent a letter to the king of Numenor, warning him of a rising evil and asking for aid in defending Middle-earth. Not all of Lindon's residents stayed, however. Many Teleri elves, including Thranduil's father, Orifer, migrated east to live among the Sylvan elves of Greenwood. Others, led by the legendary Galadriel and Celeborn, moved into Eriador. moved into Eriador. One group of the Noldoran smiths, led by the brilliant Celebrimbor, founded a new realm of their own near the Misty Mountains, a kingdom they called Eregion. These flourishing elven kingdoms did not go unnoticed. Around the year 1200, a being of immense power and fair appearance arrived, calling himself Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. He offered to share knowledge that would allow the elves to perfect Middle-earth, to halt its decay. Gil-galad and Elrond and Lindon were deeply suspicious. Though they didn't know who the stranger was, they saw a shadow behind his fair words and denied him entry into their realm. But Celebrimbor and the smiths of Eregion were not so wise. They were enthralled by Annatar's promises, and their tragic decision would plunge Middle-earth into war. Celebrimbor and his followers, guided by Annatar's knowledge, began to create the Rings of Power. Over centuries, they forged 16 great rings. But Annatar, who was in fact the Dark Lord Sauron, in disguise, had played them all. He returned to his own dark land of Mordor and, in the fires of Mount Doom, forged a master ring, the One Ring, to rule them all. When Sauron put on the One Ring, his deception was revealed. The elves of Eregion, horrified, took off their own rings. Celebrimbor had also forged 3 rings in secret without Sauron's touch: Narya, Nenya, and Vilya. Realizing the immense danger, he sent them away for safekeeping. One went to Galadriel and Lothlorien, and the other 2 were sent to Lindon. Gil-galad took Vilya, the Ring of Air, for himself and entrusted Narya, the Ring of Fire, to his most trusted lieutenant, the ancient shipwright Círdan. Sauron's fury was absolute. He unleashed his armies against Eregion in 1695, demanding the return of the rings. Gil-galad sent a relief force under the command of Elrond, but it wasn't enough. Eregion fell. Celebrimbor was captured, tortured, and killed. Elrond managed to escape with the survivors, leading them north to establish a hidden refuge that would become known as Rivendell. With Eregion destroyed, all of Eriador lay open to Sauron's armies, and for the next few years his orcs rampaged across the land. Lindon itself came under direct assault, with Gil-galad's forces barely holding the line at the River Lune. It seemed only a matter of time before the last elven kingdoms in the west would be extinguished. Now, as a side note, I choose not to have sponsors or affiliates in these videos because we're completely self-funded. I do have one thing I think you might like though, and that's my fantasy all-access library. It's a huge shared universe that my team and I have built where all the mythologies live side by side, and it's filled with all of my fantasy books, and it's how we're able to keep this channel going. And if you're Tolkien fans, you might like this book that I had. This is called Path of the Dragon. This is a loose adaptation of an ancient 16th century book called The Fairy Queen, written by Edmund Spenser, and who's a contemporary of Shakespeare. And this book adapts that story, or part of the story at least, in a way that fits with my world, combining all of the mythologies together. So it's a loose adaptation, but I think if you like Tolkien, if you like older stories told in a more modern way, you'll like this one. Alright, so in that most desperate hour when all hope seemed lost, a vast fleet appeared on the horizon. The sails of Numenor had arrived. King Tar-Minster answered Gil-galad's long-standing plea and had sent his navy. Sauron, caught between the elves in the north and the massive Númenórean army landing in the south, was utterly defeated. His forces were shattered at the Battle of Gwathlo, and Sauron himself was forced to flee back to Mordor, nursing a bitter hatred for the men of the west. The war was over for now, and Lindon had survived. But in the aftermath of the war, a great council was held. The wise decided that Rivendell would be maintained as the new elven stronghold in the east, and it was here in secret that Gil-galad gave the ring Vilya to Elrond, recognizing that his herald would become a great leader in the ages to come. For over 1500 years, Lindon enjoyed a period of relative peace and power. Gil-galad's influence extended across all of Eriador, all the way to the borders of Greenwood. This was the height of Lindon's power, a golden afternoon before the long twilight. But while Lindon prospered, Numenor rotted from within. Sauron, ever patient, allowed himself to be taken as a prisoner in the year 3262 by the proud Númenórean king Alpharazon. From his cell, he whispered poison into the king's ear, corrupting the court and turning the people against the Valar. He convinced them to build a great armada and sail west to seize immortality by force. The result was annihilation. The island of Numenor was swallowed by the sea, lost forever. The first sign of this catastrophe in Lindon would have been the ocean itself, as a great wave rose and covered some of its coastal lands. But all was not lost. A handful of ships escaped the downfall, led by a man named Elendil the Tall and his sons Isildur and Anarion. Elendil's ships were washed ashore in the Gulf of Lune, where he was met by his friend Gil-galad. The High King welcomed the refugees, granting them the lands east of Lindon to found their own kingdom, Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south. But Sauron's spirit had also survived the destruction of Numenor. He returned to Mordor, and just over a century later, he was ready to strike again. He launched an attack on Gondor, capturing the fortress of Minas Ithil. Isildur fled north to bring word to his father, and upon hearing the news, Elendil and Gil-galad met in the watchtower of Amon-Sul. There they forged one final desperate pact, the alliance of elves and men. This was the greatest army seen in Middle-earth since the War of Wrath. Elves from Lindon and Rivendell, men from Arnor and Gondor, and even dwarves from Khazad-dûm marched on Mordor. After a bloody battle on the plains, they laid siege to Sauron's fortress of Barad-dûr for 7 long years. In the final climactic confrontation, Gil-galad and Elendil faced Sauron himself. They succeeded in overthrowing him, but at the cost of their own lives. Gil-galad was slain by the burning heat of Sauron's hand, and so passed the last High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth. The alliance was victorious, but the age of elven preeminence was over. With the death of their king and heavy losses from the war, the realm of Lindon began to fade. Many of the Noldor, weary of the sorrows of Middle-earth, finally chose to sail west from the Grey Havens. Elrond, though next in line, chose not to take up the title of High King. The age of elven kings was done. Leadership of what remained of Lindon fell to Círdan the ancient shipwright, who was now known only as Lord of the Havens. Círdan was less a king and more a custodian. His purpose was no longer to wage war or extend power, but to preside over the slow departure of his people. The Third Age of Middle-earth was dominated by the kingdoms of men, and Lindon's role became more supportive. They frequently sent aid to the northern kingdom of Arnor during its long war against the Witch King of Angmar, and Círdan himself led a host of elves that helped secure the final victory at the Battle of Fornust. Now, around the year 1000 of the Third Age, strange visitors arrived at the Grey Havens, the Istari, or wizards, sent from Valinor to aid the free peoples. Círdan, with wisdom that spanned millennia, looked upon the one called Gandalf and knew his spirit was the greatest. He gave the wizard Narya the Ring of Fire, saying, "Take this ring, for your labors will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself." For the next 2,000 years, Lindon continued its slow fade. The Grey Havens were its last bastion, a place of memory and farewells. And as the War of the Ring concluded and the Fourth Age began, the time of the elves truly came to an end. On a ship built by Círdan, the great leaders of the age, Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf, departed for the Undying Lands along with the ring-bearers, Bilbo and Frodo Baggins. Later, Samwise Gamgee would follow. Círdan himself was the last. He remained at his post until every elf who wished to leave had set sail. Then, at some unknown date, he boarded the last ship, joined by Celeborn, and took the straight road into the west. With his departure, the realm of Lindon was no more. It was a kingdom born from the ashes of one age, and its end marked the final closing of another. So, was Lindon just a military power? Far from it. Its most important function was cultural and spiritual. In an age of decline, Lindon became the primary repository for elven lore and history and art. The songs and stories of the First Age, like the languages of the elves, the skills of craft, all were preserved there safe from the encroaching darkness. Without Lindon, much of what we know about the Elder Days would have been lost forever. The realm also served as the primary diplomatic bridge between the races of Middle-earth. Gil-galad's cultivation of a relationship with Númenor and later Elendil was instrumental in uniting the free peoples against Sauron. Lindon was neutral ground, a place for elves, men, and even dwarves could meet to forge the alliances necessary for survival. This diplomatic role was just as crucial as any army they fielded. Most profoundly, the Grey Havens became what is known as a liminal space, a threshold between worlds. For the elves, it was the gateway back to their eternal home, a place saturated with the sorrow of departure and the hope of reunion. For mortals, it was the closest they could ever come to the shores of the Undying Lands, a place of myth and legend. The fact that the heroes of the War of the Ring made their final journey from its docks cements Lindon's legacy not just as a kingdom, but as the final hinge upon which an entire age of the world turned. What began as a military and political power slowly transformed into something else entirely, a symbol of passage, of ending, and of the graceful, sorrowful retreat of the people whose time in the world had come to an end. The story of Lindon is one of the most bittersweet in all of fantasy, a reminder that even for immortal beings, nothing lasts forever. It expresses the idea that sometimes the greatest strength is not in fighting, but in knowing when to let go. If you enjoy these deep dives into the lore of great fantasy worlds, you might be interested in the worlds that I'm building, where you can get at my library that I already mentioned in my, which is built on a platform called School. Members get access to my ebooks and audiobooks with a new novel released every month, sometimes more. We also do weekly live calls where we can discuss Tolkien, other fantasy lore, writing, world building, nerd stuff. And it's the community that makes this channel possible. So with that, I will see you in the next video.